In today's episode, we're going to explore the leaked OpenAI memo that came out just over a week ago. In that memo, Sam Altman said, "We're at a critical time for ChatGPT. OpenAI is now playing defensive against Google Gemini 3. The prediction markets have shifted dramatically, and Google sits at between 87 and 92% odds to have the leading model by the end of this year, versus OpenAI at just 8%. 3 years ago, you could have never imagined something like that happening. ChatGPT was just released, and Google announced Code Red. Google had their two previous founders come in, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They came back and did all-nighters to review code personally. Those were the two founders of Google that had stepped back from operations completely. Teams at Google were reassigned overnight, and all resources were reallocated. It was in that year that it felt like the beginning of the end of Google's dominance. Fast forward to December 2025, and things have changed dramatically. In today's episode, we're going to explore the OpenAI situation and see if it really is as bad as it seems. Okay, so this week is yet another week of being ill. The flu has caught me twice in the space of a month. I'd make it make sense. I have no idea how that even works. Recovering from a flu, having like 3 or 4 days recovered, and then suddenly catching it again. So I'm still incredibly bunged up and feel very, very rough. But the show must go on. So for today's episode, we're going to start with what Code Red actually means, because that is what OpenAI have just kind of announced in that leaked memo. Well, if we break down what it actually says, it's really quite interesting, because in it, he actually broke down, and by him I mean Sam Altman, he broke down 6 big areas of focus for OpenAI, which is ChatGPT personalization and customization, its better model behavior measured by the LM Arena benchmarks, its speed and reliability improvements, it's reducing over-refusals, which have become just a massive area of annoyance for most users on ChatGPT. They're going to try and launch a new reasoning model, which they believe, although that it's just a claim, is supposed to be ahead of Gemini 3. And finally, image generation improvements too. So Mark Chan, OpenAI's chief research officer, has become personally accountable to leading all daily progress calls on ChatGPT, because fundamentally this is a refocusing on ChatGPT as a core product. So yeah, this is massive internal urgency at scale at OpenAI, and it's gone from yellow warnings to a red warning, which is their highest alert level internally. Yet most coverage online so far has completely ignored the fact that this wasn't a sudden change to, Code Red. Code Red was the escalation of a crisis that began a good few weeks ago now. Back in October, Sam Altman sent an internal memo to different team members warning staff to expect quite a rough period of time, maybe even much, much slower growth as well financially. And he admitted in that memo that Google's been doing excellent work recently in almost every single aspect, particularly in pre-training, which is an area that OpenAI really haven't been able to innovate in for quite some time. So when Code Red just dropped in December, it wasn't panic, it was the second alarm bell. And I think what's most telling with this announcement is the things that they've actively said they're going to drop. So all advertising plans, for example, are on hold, and they were quite far along. You've heard me speak about this quite a few times, saying how disappointed I would be to see that happen inside a large language model. But yeah, they were quite far along with that. I mean, Android beta code actually found in late November explicit references to ads features, search ad carousels, and bizarre content. So yeah, OpenAI were really building serious ad infrastructure, and they'd forecast they were going to make $1 billion in free user monetization by 2026, which is obviously now been stopped and halted as a project. And to me, this shows how confident they must have been feeling at one point to be going for ads. And that makes me incredibly sad personally, that ads were going to be brought into any ChatGPT or large language model. To me, this shows how confident they were clearly feeling at one point to even think about bringing in ads. And in fact, the CTO of an AI startup called Hyperbolic posted a screenshot on X of Peloton advertisements inside the conversation. And he was paying the $200 a month license. I mean, I've spoken about this before. Sam Altman, a good 3 years ago, said ads were unsettling and a last resort for a business. And yeah, earlier this year, he then said he really loves how Instagram do ads. and thought OpenAI could bring some really cool product ads into their platform too. So yeah, they were clearly putting a massive amount of focus there. Another area they're dropping is shopping and health agents. So agents that help me buy healthy things and do healthy things. They've also paused the Pulse feature, which is that kind of proactive morning briefing system that Sam Altman said it was his favorite feature of ChatGPT. I guess what does this tell us then? It tells us that OpenAI is consolidating its focus and its effort. They're abandoning revenue diversification just to double down on their core product, which is ChatGPT, and the quality they're providing to users, which has definitely dropped. Some may say that it's a very risky bet given the amount of financial pressures they're under, the fact that the economy, everybody's talking about AI bubbles and things going wrong. So there's a lot of pressure there, and they've got incredible financial targets to hit. However, I do the exact same. I would want to focus on what is winning most in the market and become the best in the world at that thing. Because ultimately, if that foundation dies off, it's game over. And I mean, Steve Jobs famously said that it's just better to have less products but do them incredibly well and do incredible marketing for those products than having lots of random products in the market that confuses everybody. There's also a financial lens to all of this. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time here because I feel like there's so much discourse online about financial pressures and economic bubbles that, I mean, it's so boring. But yeah, OpenAI are, of course, under lots of pressure. So they're burning through cash at a crazy rate. You know, $5 billion in losses in 2024, projected to be $8.5 billion this year. And HSBC analysts forecast that they've got a $207 billion funding shortfall. So they're short of $207 billion in funding from now to 2030. And there was apparently some leaked financial figures that they expect to lose up to $74 billion in a year. The company's also committed to $1.4 trillion in infrastructure spending over the next 8 years. And this is a really tough one because data center infrastructure needs to be built out to hit your growth targets. So they'll look at the amount of users or products in the market, therefore how much data center capacity do they really need, and based on the products they want to launch, they're going to need more data centers and GPUs. So naturally that creates a fixed amount of spending on data warehouse infrastructure. And if they don't commit to it now, they won't have it in the future because it's not something that you just, it's not like buying a car and going to the shop and driving away with it. It needs to be built out for you. So these are things that they can't escape from as a financial and a business model. But gosh, it makes it very expensive to run. And they're projected that they're going to need $200 billion in revenue by 2030 as a result, just to become profitable. And their current run rate is $13 billion. And a run rate as a word, it basically means it's a very simple and quick financial projection that essentially takes your current short-term revenue and earnings, say like monthly or quarterly earnings, and then uses them to essentially guess what your total yearly earnings would be. So that means the math just doesn't work out. They're not earning enough money per month and per quarter to ever hit that amount. So they're going to have to just keep growing bigger and bigger and faster and raise more and more money to do it. And the way that that's going to work out is having market dominance. If they don't have market dominance, people don't believe in the product, so they're not going to give them that much money. Their valuation jumped from about $157 billion in October 2024 to double that. So double $150 billion to $300 billion by March of this year. And then by October of this year, it was at $500 billion. Now, for what is technically a startup, that is a 38 times multiple on how much they actually earn. And for context, NVIDIA, huge earnings, they are trading at 24 times their revenue. So they're valued at 24 times their revenue. OpenAI is valued at 38 times their revenue. So yeah, to achieve these crazy numbers and market narrative and the amount of money that people want to put into them, they have to be a dominant player in the market. So Gemini 3 coming along and potentially beating them is an existential threat, especially because all of their competitors have access to better credit than them. Google can get money easier and quicker than OpenAI. Now then, if we go further and look at what users are actually saying, one developer on the OpenAI community forum said basically because of all the new changes It's basically made ChatGPT as a subscription just completely useless in most cases, because either when they're trying to do coding tasks, it is overly verbose, but people who are trying to do writing tasks, it's not verbose enough. It's also got a big problem with over-refusals, as I've mentioned before, which is when OpenAI just explicitly refuses to do things for you. If you ask it what the very best biscuit type is, it will say that you shouldn't be biased towards biscuit types. One user asked for an explanation of Russian roulette, and it refused to give them the rules, even though the question was just out of curiosity. I actually tried to do this over the weekend as a test. I wanted a series of questions of what would you do in this situation? And I wanted to make them either scary or crass and rude, and you just couldn't get it to work. And then the number one biggest problem is still sycophancy. The model just agreeing with everything somebody is saying and refusing to push back or giving false validation. Now, OpenAI say they're going to be focusing on personalization and customization, so obviously they're trying to fix this. But most people are wanting a model that is going to disagree with them. Another major problem OpenAI have got here is the switching problem. So one Reddit user perfectly captured this. Claude smokes GPT for Python, and it isn't even close on my end. Another said that they switched to Claude yesterday, and it enabled them to build an entire phone app. And because of the context window, it required you to press continue 4 separate times. So it ran out of context and then needed to start again. Yet perfectly started where it left off and did a really, really good job. The benchmarks back all of this up. On the SWE benchmark, which is the gold standard for evaluating coding, Claude 4 Sonnet scored 72% and GPT-4o scored 33%. And it also shows in the way that the world has adopted these different language models. Cursor adopted Claude as their main programmer language. GitHub did the same. Windsurf, SourceGraph, Cody, Augment Code, they all did the same. The financial impact of this is pretty massive. Claude Code has hit $1 billion in revenue in 6 months. And Claude is out there acquiring a series of different businesses to make their Claude Code product even better. So they're not just winning the market or ahead in the market, they are investing extremely heavily into becoming the leader and winner of that market. And you'll notice in the list of priorities that I said Sam Altman laid out, coding wasn't in there. So yeah, my read is that OpenAI is kind of quietly accepting and conceding that the market has been lost for now for coding to Anthropic. They've still got their Codex product out there. They're probably going to still continue it. But clearly it's not the main priority anymore. And it makes sense because really they're having huge pressure from the consumer market when it comes to Gemini. And that's their main base of users and revenue. 800 million ChatGPT users. So yeah, they are facing huge competition. And I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on that competition. On benchmarks, Google's Gemini 3 currently sits at number 1 on the LM Arena with a record 1400 score. Anthropic dominates 6 of the top 10 spots, and ChatGPT's 5.1 is only in 6th place. That's not terrible, but it's also not market leadership. Because, on user metrics, ChatGPT still has 800 million weekly active users, which is just enormous. And apparently, according to OpenAI, they dominate with 70% of all AI assistant usage. That's not going to last forever. Gemini just jumped from 450 to 650 million active users. And that's monthly active users. So yeah, quite far behind OpenAI, but they will and are able to catch up. And that happened between July and October of this year. And a metric that will really worry OpenAI is session time. Google now has a better session time than OpenAI. 7 minutes and 8 seconds versus 6 minutes and 25 seconds at OpenAI. When users are spending more time with one product over another, it probably will start to tell you something. Unless, of course, the extra couple of minutes in Gemini is spent being really frustrated, which I don't think is the case. And ChatGPT's daily active users dropped 6% recently. They're also facing massive competition from an enterprise market perspective. According to a mid-2025 report, Anthropic now has 32% of enterprise market share, versus OpenAI's 25%. Now, just 1 year prior, OpenAI had 50%, and Anthropic just had 12%. That's a massive reversal. OpenAI are also facing a massive talent drain right now as well. Dozens of top researchers have left for competitors. OpenAI's CTO launched Thinking Machines and recruited loads of incredible talent from OpenAI. Meta's new superintelligence lab obviously then poach people aggressively too. And Mark Chen revealed how intense this talent war really is, because Meta is spending $10 billion annually on acquiring AI talent. And apparently Zuck has been hand-delivering people soup to try and persuade them to come on board. So yeah, no wonder that OpenAI has sounded the alarm and made Code Red such a big priority. So yeah, over the next period, I think you need to be all watching for a few things, and I'll lay them out just now. So I think first and foremost, the Code Red memo promised a new reasoning model over the next few that's supposedly better than Gemini's new model. Apparently Mark Chen, the chief research officer, said that OpenAI had succeeded in infusing a smaller model with the same amount of knowledge than previously was required for a big, large system. This is important because when they throttle intelligence, so i.e. reduce the number of tokens and make everything very short and concise, it just makes you feel like it's just stupider. Every single person wants the most powerful, cleverest model possible all of the time. A second thing to look out for is user retention. So ChatGPT's engagement metrics are still incredibly strong, so 12.74 visits per unique visitor, but Gemini's user base is growing really quickly. As I said, from 450 million to 650 million in just a few months. People will be watching very closely to see if OpenAI's improvements in their product leads to a more retained user base or just a slower attrition and a slower decline. A third big thing to watch for will be enterprise wins. The Fortune 500 market is incredibly important to these products. And if you see Anthropic winning over and over again, well, it will tell you a lot about where OpenAI is heading. Fourth is developer sentiment. The coding market is where AI accomplishes big long-term value through API revenue, tool integration, developers building products on their platform. And right now, Claude is owning that conversation. OpenAI has to close the coding gap. So yeah, there's some of the big things that I'd be looking for. Now, to conclude this episode, I think what I find so interesting about this moment in time right now is that, just 3 years ago, smart money would say that Google was going to struggle. They've been caught completely flat-footed. The founders had to come back. The panic was real. Market sentiment was very negative. Yet today, Google has the best ranked model in the world, the fastest growing user base in the world, and the infrastructure advantage from building their own chips, their own products, just vertically integrated product set. Whereas OpenAI are now in a position that Google were in just a few years ago. The difference is OpenAI doesn't have Google's resources. They don't have distribution. They don't have the hardware vertical integration. And they're burning through capital at a crazy, crazy rate. And they're having to fight a consumer war against Google, yet they're fighting a coding war against Anthropic and an enterprise market war against Microsoft. These are all very different markets with very different dynamics. So yeah, OpenAI's Code Red really is a fantastic reminder that perceived market leadership never lasts forever. However, Google's return also shows that anything is possible. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you next week.